Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report, Tuesday's edition, broadcasting from chilly Irvine, California. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas to all. Hey folks, we have a fun show today. We've got a fascinating author who's going to share some wonderful stories with you, brighten up your holiday season. We'll talk about that during the first part of the show, and then we'll get to the news of the day. But I'd like to welcome author Jared Knott to Schaftlein Report. Jared, happy to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Hey, listen, let's talk about, I love the fascinating title of your book, Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters. 39 tiny mistakes that changed the world. Jared, what a fascinating title. I did some research on it. Talk to our audience, and folks, we'll get to the news later, but this is some fascinating historical stuff, especially for you history buffs out there. Jared, give the audience your background, why you decided to write this book, and then let's talk a little bit about some of these fascinating stories from the book.
Yes, my background is I'm not a history professor. I've been a history buff since I was like 13 or 14 years old. I've been a VP of sales and marketing in the home improvement industry. And now I'm kind of semi-retired. But I got the inspiration for the book came from an old adage that comes down from Benjamin Franklin, that for want of the nail, the shoe was lost. For want of the shoe, the rider was lost. For want of the rider, the battle was lost. For want of the battle, the empire was lost. The empire was lost, all for the want of a nail. But how often does that really happen? That a single tiny mistake, that's a nice old saying, but how often does it really happen that a single tiny mistake causes an entire empire to collapse? 39 times. Actually, a little bit more than that, but I use the 39 as kind of a rhetorical number. It really it's about 43 or 44 stories in the book. But it happens over and over again, a little tiny mistake, and it sits in early in a progression, another dominoes into something else, dominoes into something else, and you have a huge catastrophe at the end.
Well, you know, in my notes, you talked about a couple things here. You said, and I'll give you a couple, a single document poorly designed by a single clerk in a single country ended up changing the outcome of a presidential election. Give us some background on that one, and that's just one of many.
Yes, that one really stings, and that's a lady, a very nice lady, very intelligent lady. She was the clerk of elections down in Palm Beach County, and she wanted to design a ballot that was in large print for the older people to read. Yep. So she designed this ballot called the Butterfly Ballot. It had a left page and a right page with a series of punch holes down the center. The Al Gore was a confusing ballot the way it was put together. Al Gore was the number 2 name. Yep. On the left page, but he was the number 3 punch hole. The number 2 punch hole belonged to Pat Buchanan on the right side. And surrounding counties, Pat Buchanan got maybe 100, 150 votes per county. In this particular county, he gets over 3,000 votes. And he himself said there was confusion, people punching in the wrong punch hole. Also, some people would first punch one punch hole and then the other. Saw that the 5,000 ballots were invalidated because they had double punched, which probably out of confusion also. Right. Al Gore lost the state of Florida in 2000 by like 456 votes. Yep. He would have easily won it by 2 or 3, maybe 5 or 6,000 votes. He would have won the state of Florida. He would have won the presidential election. He would have been president of the United States. He was adamantly opposed to the war in Iraq. The war in Iraq would never have taken place. And I think what Democrats and Republicans now both agree the war was a major mistake, should never have happened in the first place. Now, they had this nice lady, won't say her name, but she was on a morning television being interviewed. Madam, people say that you're responsible for this war. And she was in tears. Woo, 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 woo. Yes, ma'am, we appreciate the fact that you're crying, but we have 50,000 dead people and $2 trillion down the drain because of a single tiny mistake.
And full disclosure for you, Jared, at the time that you're describing, I was and am a resident of Palm Beach County. Okay. I happened to vote in that election. I'm quite familiar with who that party was, yes. and the infamous, boy, folks, you can't remember this. The iconic picture from the day was the guy holding up like the magnifying glass, looking down at the butterfly ballots with the holes punched in. And that is a fascinating take. And you know what? I can absolutely relate to it because I was there.
Yes, I never met anybody who was actually there. But did you vote correctly?
I voted correctly, yes. And I was, look, to add some flavor to it, look, you're not going to, Pat Buchanan and Al Gore, politically, there's no semblance whatsoever in that. I mean, Pat Buchanan was to the right of George W. Bush. Al Gore obviously was to the left. And a lot of senior citizens in Palm Beach County, excuse me, did get confused by that ballot. And they actually, and that is a factual statement. Look, I'm a conservative Republican, but the factual statement is, had that, and you're spot on, had the people really understood who they were voting for, and you can make the argument, well, hey, they got to be smart enough to figure they're voting, but that ballot was confusing.
Yes, and the courts would not step in and put themselves in the shoes of the voters. They would not reverse it, although a strong case can be made, just as we did, that it should have gone the other direction.
Yep.
So I'm not a particular fan of Al Gore, but he should have won that election based on the numbers.
Yep, yes, yeah. You can make that argument. Another one here: a soldier accidentally kicks a helmet off the top of a wall and causes an entire empire to fall.
Yes, that's right. That's it's interesting. You're looking at a tiny little mistake that had a huge impact. That's from the ancient world, and it involves Cyrus the Great, who was one of the first world conquerors. And his tomb, by the way, he's mentioned in the Bible. He was the one that freed the children of Israel from their Babylonian captivity, and they're allowed to return back to Israel. But his tomb is still there in Iran, which was then called Persia. And these are the words on his tomb: "O ye traveler who comes to visit me, and I know you will come, for I am the one who gave the Persians their empire. Do not begrudge me this small amount of dirt that I placed over my bones." So anyway, and he was in a battle with Croesus, from the old expression "rich as Croesus," and he was the emperor of Lydia, and his fortress city was Sardis. But he got a reputation for being wealthy because he had gone to the Oracle of Delphi, and he's passed a whole bunch of gold around, a bunch of silver around, that sort of thing, trying to buy a good positive prediction as to the coming battle. And the Oracle said, "A great battle will be fought, and a great victory will be won." We took that to mean that he was going to win the victory, but that's not the way it turned out. So anyway, the battle is joined. The Spartans are on the side of Croesus. The battle is a draw. Cyrus the Great takes his troops, puts them back on his ships, and sails away. The Spartans, well, we won the battle. The Spartans also leave and go back to Sparta. But they did not call him Cyrus the Great for nothing. After 4 or 5 days, he turns around and comes back now that the Spartans are gone, and once again engages in a battle with for Lydia against Croesus. But the winter is coming. The Spartans are going to be returning. It's not clear if he's going to win or not. And here came the tiny mistake. A soldier up on top of the wall, there was a sheer cliff on that side of the wall. It did not have a lot of men stationed there because it was considered to be impregnable. He accidentally kicks his helmet off the top of the wall. He was coming all the way down to the bottom. Then he gets off of the wall and walks down a footpath all the way down to the bottom to get his helmet and walk all the way back up. But one of Cyrus's men sees him. Well, look. There's a pathway up the side of the wall. So the next night, a raiding party follows that pathway up the top of the wall, goes over the top of the wall, goes over, forces open the gates of the city. Cyrus's men are waiting there. They come flooding into the city, and they conquer Lydia, all because of somebody had clumsy feet.
Unbelievable. That's just that's just amazing. Something like that could happen.
Imagine his embarrassment.
Oh my God! Yeah. Hey, I'd hate to see what kind of penalty he ended up getting. And then something more in the in the 20th century here, a small mechanical device, okay, several inches long, fails to function. Now I know our listeners and viewers may be able to figure this one out. It had a significant change in World War II outcome that ultimately, because that act failed, millions more people died. Put your thinking caps on, folks. I know you can figure this one out. Go ahead, Jared. Give them the.
Yes, sir. That involves the German generals' plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. And one of the leaders of that plot, the Russian side of the equation, was Henning von Tresckow. And at one point, the assassins, the general was going to just give up. Things had not worked out. It never could seem to make it successful. It seemed to kind of bubble along. And he sent them a message saying, no, that the attempt should go to take Hitler's life, should go ahead, even if it fails. And he said it's probably going to fail, but it should go ahead so that the people of the world will know, and people of future generations will know, that there were men inside Germany willing to lay down their lives to oppose Hitler and the evil he represented. And they tried several different ways of killing Hitler. None of them seemed to work out. And the plan this time was they enticed Hitler to come to Russia during the, of course, the Russian war with Russia, and have a great big meeting on strategy and planning and so on and so forth. And as he's getting in his plane to fly back to Berlin, they came up with a box that had supposedly a bottle of liquor to be given as a gift to a German general back in Berlin, but instead it actually had a bomb in it. And they pulled the trigger on the detonating device, which is about 3.5 to 4 inches long. It involved acid eating through a particular plate and then firing a trigger that would set off the detonator to blow up the bomb. So they put the box on Hitler's plane. Okay, you can imagine the tension. Okay, then the plane takes off. It's supposed to blow up about 45 minutes later. You can imagine them pacing back and forth. And then about 2 or 3 hours later, they hear nothing. 2 or 3 hours later, Hitler's plane lands without incident. Oh boy. Now they got the box there with the bomb in it. If somebody opens up the box and discovers that it was a bomb, they're in big trouble.
Yeah.
So they managed to retrieve the box several weeks later. They opened it up, and this small little pin had failed to function correctly. The little firing device had failed to function correctly. And the war went on until, of course, April of 1945. It could have ended a good 1 year sooner. Hundreds of thousands of lives would have been changed, and the map of Europe would have been quite a bit different, all except for that single tiny device malfunctioning.
Wow. I mean, it's just fascinating how tiny little things like you reference in your book have altered the course of history. I'm going to give you one more here, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. You had a piece in there, and this is a little seductive here, folks. So it's this little fascinating thing here. A man gathers his army to defend an attack, but he's under the influence of opium and a beautiful young slave woman.
Right.
Here it is, guys. You know, it happens all the time. So go ahead, Jared.
Yes, the full teaser that follow through on that. Yes, a man who was president of a nation was in charge of a large army facing a dangerous enemy. But when the expected attack from the enemy came, as you said, he was in his tent, high in opium, cavorting with a beautiful young slave woman. And the battle led to the founding of a new nation, and a famous song was later written about the beautiful young woman. Okay, it had to do with the Texas battle for independence. In Santa Ana in 1834, had declared himself presidente and nullified all of the different legislatures and the Congress that they had in Mexico at that time. Rebellion rose up in all 7 states, Texas being one of the 7 states. And Santa Ana went around for 2 years, crushing each of the rebellions in each of the states with great cruelty. And after he crushed the 6 south of the Rio Grande, it came time to move across the Rio Grande with his army and face the Norte Americanos. Then came the Alamo, which of course was a disaster. Then came San Jacinto, which was another disaster. And San Houston had just 700 troops, many of them barefoot, eating raw corn. That's all that was left of the Texas Revolution. And Santa Ana at this point, having won battle after battle after battle, as a point on the book, began to suffer what they call victory disease. He won so many, he was so often, it was just a question of chasing these few rebels down, like chasing a rabbit into a hole. There wasn't much left to worry about. He got a little sloppy and he got loose. He took his army of about 25,000 men and he scattered them in 3 or 4 different directions across the state of Texas, following different minor battles. And he himself was very loosely and very casual way pursuing Sam Houston. But then he stumbled into a mistake. He comes out on what amounts to a kind of a peninsula. It has water on 3 sides and has the remnants of the Texican army on the other side. And through a dispatch, Sam Houston sees what he's done. He said, whoa, with this, I think we have the monkey up a tree. And so his men, who are a rowdy bunch, by the way, loud, noisy, rowdy bunch, they wanted to attack at dawn the next morning. But he said he slept late that day. No, we're not going to attack. His men, almost in rebellion. You're a coward. You're incompetent. At one point, he had dug 2 graves, marked it with a notice that the graves would be filled with the bodies of mutineers. So anyway, but at 3:30 in the afternoon, without any prior warning, he calls his army into battle formation. Okay? And then they marched into army with a pipist playing an old tune. It was a bower is a house, but the old love song was, come to my bower, shaded by the tree, come to my bower and lie down with me. There in the roses and the lilacs will lie, a little blush on your cheek, but a smile in your eye. But the surprise was complete total. The battle lasted 18 and a half minutes. It was a complete rout. Santa Anna comes out of his tent, rubbing his eyes, wearing red carpet slippers. Bugler, sound assembly. I've been shot, Generalissimo. Drummer, sound assembly. I've been shot also, Generalissimo. He sees one of his biggest divisions in full retreat. He jumps on a black horse and rides away. Now, you have a very intelligent audience, and I'm going to ask a question I think most of them can get. Why did Sam, by the way, let me back up a little bit. He had a conference with one of his chief aides, a man named Hockley. And General, why don't you share your plans with the other officers so we'll have a better atmosphere around camp? He said, if I did that, I would be a bigger enemy of Texas than even Santa Anna is. I grant you we could have won if we had attacked this morning at dawn. We would have won probably, but with heavy casualties. When I attack, we will lose less than a dozen men and victory is assured. How in the world could he be so sure? Here's the question for your very intelligent audience. Why did he choose to attack the Mexican army at 3:30 in the afternoon? What was happening with the Mexican army at 3:30 in the afternoon? He chose to attack.
Siesta time.
Siesta, exactly right. He had good information, good intelligence to believe that security in the Mexican army during the siesta period fell to an absolute zero. So they took him completely by surprise. Of course, the turning point in history, because that's what established Texas as a free nation, which later, of course, joined the United States as a state. But the famous song, the young lady, her name was Emily Morgan. She was of African and Hispanic heritage, and she was the Yellow Rose of Texas.
Oh my, that ties them all together there. Wow, that's interesting. Well, I got to tell you something, Jared. This and many, many other stories in your book. Wow, just a fascinating read on all these for all you history buffs out and non-history buffs just looking for a little levity here over the holiday season. Let me ask you this, Jared. And again, it's hard to predict mistakes, obviously, but is there anything you're seeing in our, quote, modern America, little things happening? You know, you gave an example of the 2000 election. That's pretty recent, 21 years ago. But anything current affairs that you see, tiny little things happening that could have a major effect on world history?
Well, of course, Wuhan obviously comes to mind. The pandemic that has killed millions of people at this point. But I was may do a book later where we add one more chapter, 2 or 3 more chapters. But I don't at this point want to get into that. I've not researched it well enough. But I will say here's one that took place in the 1919 Versailles Treaty, which has a major impact on the United States and the world today. And it's a fascinating story, even though it involves some Chinese politics. So let me explain.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Yes, of course, the war was won by the Allies, and all the people on the winning side, the countries on the winning side, wanted to cut up the spoils. Japan had defeated the Germans in the Pacific, and they occupied the German concessions in China. That's the areas of China that Germany controlled. Okay, the Chinese had given 100,000 workers who came over to France and had been digging trenches for 3 or 4 years of the war. They were entitled to their share of the spoils also. Japan wanted 2 things. They wanted to have the German concessions given to them, number 1, and number 2, this was a very small thing. They wanted a statement in the Versailles Treaty, really just 1 paragraph, saying that all human beings throughout the world should be given equal equality in terms of rights under the laws of all nations. Equal equality for all people of the world. Well, you can go to the Declaration of Independence, you just quote a couple of sentences with Declaration of Independence, that would have done the trick just fine. Here was the problem. Down in Australia, they think of themselves, even to this day, as a white island floating in an Asian sea. They did not want any statements about equality, which put them under pressure to allow immigration from Asia into Australia. They wanted to keep the wages of the workers there high. So it was a sensitive thing there. Also in California and Oregon, the Western senators had the same issue. They did not want a lot of immigration coming from Japan and China, the cheap labor, which would have made the wages lower for their voters, for their workers. So both the Western senators and a very irascible man named Tony Hughes, down in the Prime Minister of Australia, were opposed to that 1 simple paragraph in the Versailles Treaty. You'd think today, what in the world? But anyway, so it became a very sensitive, sticky point, and they couldn't work out a compromise. Now, so as a sop to the Japanese, they said, well, okay, we can't give you that paragraph of equality statement that you wanted. I'll tell you what we'll do instead. We will let you have the German concessions that you're asking for. Well, now, Wilson's 14 points, the main thrust of his 14 points was local people got to have local governments. Colonial powers would not enforce themselves on top of local governments and local peoples. So this was a direct perpendicular violation of Wilson's 14 points. Mm-hmm. But this decision was announced on, the dates are very important, on May 3rd, okay? On the now famous May 4th, there's demonstrations all across China. And the May 4th movement began, and it got stronger and stronger and stronger. And about that same time, there was a philosophy coming out of Russia called Communism. And the Chinese nationalists said this: we had believed in Woodrow Wilson and the Western democracies, and then we decided that they were all great liars. So they rejected democracy, rejected Woodrow Wilson. Here came communism. They embraced communism. Mao Zedong, of course, part of the movement. In fact, they were just celebrating the 102 anniversary of communism, okay, recently, and it grows in power. Mao Zedong eventually takes over, and China is not a democracy today because of that tiny mistake. India's a democracy, Japan's a democracy, South Korea's a democracy. China might very well have been a democracy, and think how different the world would be if we had a democratic China. Massive difference. Of course, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Wuhan disaster, all of that would have been avoided. Plus, the people of China would be a much happier people if it hadn't been for that single tiny mistake. You just want to go beat your head against the wall. I mean, come on. All human beings should be treated with equality and fairness, blah, 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 with the laws of all nations, something to that effect. Would have saved us an awful lot of misery.
Boy, oh boy. That's, folks, that is just 5 tales out of 39 that are mentioned in this book. Again, Jared, you got some really hot topics there. This is a fascinating read. And boy, I tell you what, that's exciting. And think about it, folks, all these little things that happen and the huge impact that it's had dating back over the years on people's lives. I mean, the China issue alone, the World War II issue, the presidential election. I mean, just modern stuff in the last 100 years that could have had, significant changes. You can throw in things like, John Kennedy. What if something had happened there? You always have the theorists saying, well, what if he had stayed president, and would there have been more? I mean, we could play it on and on and on, but a lot of good stuff there. And Jared, you've got some really nice things. I really appreciate it. Let me ask you a couple things here. Let's shift to modern day politics. I know our audience likes to hear some of this stuff. Look, there's some fallout from President Manchin, Senator Manchin.
Okay, some of the Freudian slip there.
No Freudian slip. We give Manchin a lot of credit, but there is a lot of fallout. The blame game is beginning for the Democratic Party. Representative Bowman in New York, who's part of that squad, basically, you would expect this, and now people, they're just sort of laughing at it now, coming out and saying, well, Manchin's a racist because he didn't approve this bill because it helps blacks, Hispanics, the poor, the needy, the thirsty, the blah, 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 blah. Again, Democratic finger pointing has really escalated. Jared, some critical mistakes that were made. They never listened to Joe Manchin over the last 6 months as he talked about what his position was the entire time. And I've used this term, they've been lying to their base, and they seem to want to continue lying to their base.
Yes, it's funny. Joe Manchin, in one sense, is thinking about it. So you probably heard about joining or becoming an independent.
Yes.
Possibly becoming a Republican or independent, and possibly he's not going to the meeting happening this afternoon. He may not be a part of that meeting. He's of the Democratic Party, so he may become an independent. He might even caucus with Republicans. It's hard to say. But of course, he's from West Virginia, which voted for Donald Trump by a 40% margin, massive margin. Well, those voters obviously want a conservative, moderate to conservative senator. And so those are the ones those are his bosses. That's who he works for. He doesn't work for the far left wing of the Democratic Party. Right. Now, generally speaking, I try to avoid getting political, but you've tempted me, so I'm going to express
I've got to throw the bait out.
I had to go for it. But yes, I think the Democratic Party has a very, very, very slender margin in the House of Representatives and no majority even in the Senate itself. It's, of course, split 50-50. And with it, razor thin margin. They want to change the entire makeup of the United States. Ronald Reagan said it very well. The closest thing to eternity is a federal program. Once they go into existence, they almost never can be eradicated. So what they were trying to do with their kind of gimmicky proposal was to put some programs in there that was just a 1 year limit or 2 year limit. Well, they would, in a year and a half or 2 years, they would have been extended, and it would have been like a $4 or $5 trillion program.
Right.
Well, that's extremely inflationary. At a time we have the worst inflation in 40 years. It's running at 6.5%, 7.5%, and by certain measures, 9.5%, but 10, 11, 12%. Inflation is horrible inflation, which is a kind of a hidden tax. And many of the things that are being proposed, closing down the Keystone Pipeline was a very foolish, it was done for political reasons. Well, it doesn't stop the petroleum from coming down from Canada. It comes down much less expensively and with less pollution, because you bring it down by truck. Okay, that's more expensive, and it causes a lot more pollution than just coming through a pipeline. And then he asked the Saudi Arabians if they'll make up for the loss of the petroleum coming out of the United States, because they've not given leases approval, and so on and so forth like that. So it's going to make up in oranges we lost in bananas, and it doesn't help the environment either way. So also the border is just a total mess, et cetera, et cetera. So they've gone far left without any kind of mandate, just a slender majority, and it's going to bring great harm. Of course, the people dying of drug overdoses, fentanyl, is at an all-time high, over 100,000 people a year. And terrible as that is just the tip of the iceberg. There are other tens and thousands, hundreds of other people addicted, young people, and as well as middle-aged people, addicted to drugs with ruined lives. That's why we have so many people living on the streets in San Francisco and Los Angeles and other cities, because they're drug addicts, defecating on the street, urinating on the street, needles on the sidewalk, and so on and so forth, people with ruined lives. That wasn't true 40 or 50 years ago. The drug addiction problem is a big part of that, and the loose enforcement law is a big part of that. So I think, and of course you see where I'm going, I think Joe Biden is way over his head. He's not a competent individual. He's been under the influence of the far left. They were doing great damage to the United States. Pray to God in a year we can get a majority of both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and pray to God we can win in 3 years and turn the country back in a more sensible and moderate direction.
Absolutely. I mean, we've said this on the show many times. 70 to 75% of the American public is either center left or center right. Joe Biden has been governing for the far left-wing radicals in his party. His staff at the White House, Manchin said one of the reasons he came to this conclusion, he could not get the staff to move off their hardcore leftist positions. And when you craft a bill that is, look, let's face it, 48 Democrats supported it because they fear the far left wing of their party, because that's where the energy is. Thank goodness we had one, maybe two standing up for that. But again, when you craft a socialist welfare bill, which is what this was, and sprinkle in some climate stuff, look, it would have fundamentally changed this country. And thank God Joe Manchin had the convictions, and he stood up and he said, no, I'm not going to put the United States through this. And then what's sort of the Democrats' reaction? Blame Manchin. Throw arrows at Manchin. I mean, he's the only reason that they have a Democratic Senate in the first place. If Manchin switched parties, Mitch McConnell's the majority leader, none of this bad legislation would be, it wouldn't even be seeing the light of day. But then what does Schumer do, Jared? He comes out and says, under pressure from his left, he says, well, we're going to have a vote on this, after the first of the year, and we're going to make Manchin stand up and vote. And Manchin saying, fine, I'll stand up and vote against it. I'm not going to change my principles. It's amazing to me, Jared. And I watch some of the talk shows and I look at some of the left-leaning Democrats that run these shows. They're actually still lying to their base, implying that after the first of the year, this bill still has a chance to get passed. I mean, it's amazing to me, just the hypocrisy going on the left, Jared. And, I agree with everything you just said there about these problems beseeching Biden. Let me ask you a question. Do you think he will learn from this and try to triangulate towards the center, or you think he's still going to be governing to the hard left?
Well, you go back to Bill Clinton, who was a wise politician. Of course, he had trouble with his personal life and keeping control of his personal urges, but he and made some messes there. But he, after losing the off-year election, he declared the end of big government, and he made a hard turn to the right and became a fairly successful president. He worked with Newt Gingrich They had a tax reduction there. They had control of spending, and he ended up being a successful president of the United States. To answer your question, no, I do not think that Joe Biden is going to show that same kind of practical wisdom. I think he is dominated by the left wing of his party. He's almost a kind of a pawn there. And of course, you wonder who is the real president. The gentleman is 78 years old. He's a little bit fuzzy, makes some very obvious mistakes there in answering questions. So I don't think he's really exactly in charge. I do not think he's going to turn to the right. I think he's going to continue to kind of mismanage the situation. And the rectification hopefully will come next November. We gain, pray to God, control of both houses.
Yeah, I think 2022 is going to be a banner year. You know, you had a couple more retirements in the Democratic side. It's up to 22 right now. But I just think, again, people see through this stuff. They don't want a socialist country. The country's already $29 trillion in debt. We got problems at our border. You know, we even have a situation now, Jared, and we've criticized her all year, but Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago is finally coming to the realization, hey, I need federal help here in this city because 840 people have been shot and killed in my city this year. She's finally coming to the feds asking for some help. And, you know, good for her. At least finally, she's recognizing this. San Francisco, they got crime problems, smash and grab robberies. The mayor announces big changes, and then what does the district attorney do? He comes out and says, no, this is wrong. We shouldn't be doing this. And I'm like, come on, man, get together here. Citizens don't want to live in crime-infested cities.
Yes, one of the most foolish ideas in the history of the United States is the defund the police idea. I mean, it's sad to say it's by Black Lives Matter to fund the police. That is a remarkably foolish proposal. And who has been harmed the most? The crime rate, of course, gone way, way up as a result. Common sense will tell you that. Murder rate is just shot through the roof. It's up like, I think, 31%. Well, there are normally 30,000 people murdered in the United States every year, which, of course, is a tragic number. It's gone up about 30%. Yeah. So it's about 9,000 people killed that would not have been killed except for that crazy program. And who is it that are being killed? Is it billionaires up in their penthouses? No, it's people living in high crime areas, many of them people of color. Well, that crazy idea is supposed to show that Black Lives Matter has cost the lives of thousands and thousands of Black people and Hispanic people as well as white people. And sometimes it's 8-year-old children and 9-year-old children. Yeah. What a foolish idea.
Oh,
one of the most ideas that produce a contrarian result than has ever been in the political history of the United States. It's a horrible, horrible disaster, which has led to lawlessness, the raiding parties going into retail stores, just terrible things happening, drugs out of control, murder rate going through the roof, crime surging. It's just a total mismanagement by the far left of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I wonder, what are they going to run on in 2022 with a track record like that? Hey, we got a few minutes left, Jared. I will close it out on one interesting news and one positive. You know, Biden is now considering in the administration, at the urging of the far left wing of the party, not moderate Democrats or even left-wing Democrats, the hardcore left is pushing him to unfreeze $10 billion of assets that the United States has frozen in Afghanistan. And I'm sitting there saying, why are these leftists so concerned about Afghanistan? I mean, you didn't hear a word from them when Biden was doing withdrawal. Now, all of a sudden, you know, the Bowmans, the Tlaibs, the Ilhan Omars, you know, Ocasio-Cortez, Pramila Jayapal, all these hardcore leftists are now pushing Biden to free up money for the Afghanistans. I don't get it. What are they trying to do? Rebuild the country now after the Taliban have done, you know, the horrific things that they've done? I don't get that one. But on the good news front, I saw a piece this morning that the Biden administration is going to agree to take fencing and supplies and stuff that's down on the border and actually finish some of the jobs that were started by the previous Trump administration. I'm thinking, well, wow, finally maybe a light went off and someone's going to agree to do something. You know, Jared, the state of Texas is now starting to build their own wall down there. So I don't know, you know, maybe instead of having stuff go to waste, I mean, they're going to do things like, you know, irrigation systems and finish walls and finish barriers and fencing. So maybe there's somebody in that administration that has some lick of common sense in them.
Yeah, I now heard that they're going to try to finish part of the wall there. Of course, the materials are sitting down there out there in the sun, and the contracts have been signed. Right. But it reduces crime. It reduces the number of drug dealers coming across the border, MS-13 coming across the border, the fentanyl coming across the border. Instead of having 100,000 people die, maybe we can get it down to 60 or 70,000, and maybe we can kind of steer in a more sensible direction. It tears at the fabric of society, all those drugs pouring into across the border. They say that China is providing that fentanyl and encouraging it from coming across the border kind of to help to destabilize the United States. So they kind of in the background of that whole situation. But maybe they're starting to get a little sense. We pray that they do.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And you know what? We wish the president the best through the holiday season. We wish his administration would shift to the middle, because that's where 75% of the public is. Hey, Jared, I got to tell you, this has been a fun day today. Let me get your closing comments here. I'd like you to maybe put up a copy of the book to the camera so people can see it, and give us some closing thoughts about your book and what you may have next for us.
Yes, I'll brag on the book. Here's a picture of the book. If you can see it there, Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, 39 tiny mistakes that changed the world forever. You can go to tinyblundersbigdisasters.com to our website. We have a book trailer there. We have 2.5 free chapters, and we have a portrait gallery and so on like that. I'll brag on the book. It has been on the bestseller list with Amazon for more than 1 year now, which is very unusual. It's also won 6 awards. We won 5 national awards and 1 regional award. Got some excellent review of 1,400 reviews, the vast majority of which have been positive. And most of all, it's a lot of fun to read the book. So if you go to the website, it's a great visit. I mean, a great visit with you, but it was a great gift for uncles, grandfathers, fathers who like history. We got a special going now for $1.99 for the electronic download, and it's $14.95 for the paperback book. But you would enjoy it very much.
Jared, I tell you what, it was a fascinating having you on the show today. I can't thank you enough for joining us here in this holiday season. And folks, it is a fascinating read. I mean, some incredible stories in the book, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Okay, Jared, again, thank you for joining us today. It's been my pleasure having you as my guest. Folks, I'll close it out with this. You know, it's the holiday season. Yes, Build Back Better is not going to be with us. Hopefully, the Democrats are going to try to regurgitate Part 722. We'll be ready for those battles. Say your thank yous to Joe Manchin. And the United States will survive this, and we will be a stronger country in 2022. Jared, thanks again, Jared. Folks, that's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow. Stay safe. Have a good evening. I'll see you tomorrow.